The dollar is collapsing right before our eyes, right? And I don't want you to get left behind. And why do I say this? Last year, the dollar lost almost 15% of its value in a year. And then now, the dollar on the dollar index, the dollar is the lowest it's been in the past 4 years. And what does that mean? That means you are losing purchasing power every single day. What does this mean? The reason why most people want to get rich is simply sometimes it's freedom, is more money, but I would simply say it's to purchase more stuff. You want more money so you have more things, so you can have more purchasing power. For example, you're losing purchasing power every single day because in 2020, a house, what you could buy a house for was maybe, let's say, 300,000, and that same house 5 years later is worth 500,000. Did the house price really go up, or did your dollar get weaker? Because we didn't add any single thing to the house. The house didn't get any special. It didn't get significantly bigger, but for some reason it got more expensive. And why is that? It's because the dollar is getting weaker, so you need more dollars to purchase the same amount of things. And so let's jump back to the original conversation. This is what happens when a society collapses. You start seeing hyperinflation. For example, if you looked at Argentina, Venezuela, at one point, you were seeing 50% inflation every single day. So what does that mean? So let's imagine that you want to go buy a $10,000 car yesterday. It's worth $10,000. Then you go to the shop the next day and it's worth, you have to buy it for $15,000. And then the next day, it's worth $20,000. Did that car really get that much better in 2 days? No, the currency you're using is just collapsing, and you need more of that currency to buy the same amount of things. So now that the dollar's collapsing, what are you seeing? You're seeing that most countries all over the world, they're running to buy gold. Why are they running to buy gold? Because gold is a hard asset that is very, very hard to print. You can always mine more gold, so there's an infinite amount of supply, but there's a certain amount of work, drilling, equipment, labor that has to go in. So it still makes it harder to mine more gold, okay? Versus a dollar, you hit one button and it prints way more dollars. And nowadays, we're barely even using paper dollars. We're just printing an electronic button and it's getting sent to everyone's bank account. So it's very simple to create more dollars, right? What you're seeing is that all these countries, they're flocking to gold, and you can see it directly in the price. I remember I was looking at gold a few years ago. It was 22,000. Now it broke 5,000, and I think it went up to maybe 5,300, right? Quote me, I could be wrong, right? But it's very close. That's not the exact price. And so you're seeing that metals, even silver, went for almost like from $50 to about like 100 something, right? And you're seeing these assets move by like 70%, 50%, 100%. And these are rare metals that take time, effort to mine. And why they going up so fast is because people are running away from the dollar. So what caused this exact moment? So roughly around in 2022, there was conflict with Russia, Ukraine, the US were going to war. They were at war with each other. And so what happened is that the U.S. confiscated, Russia was saving its hard-earned money in U.S. treasuries, reserves, dollars, right? And so since the U.S. has control over that, what they did was they just confiscated Russia's dollar reserves, right? And so what that sent to the rest of the world is, hey, I'm collecting all these tax dollars from my citizens and I'm saving it in the U.S. asset. But at any given moment, you guys can just take it if you guys don't like me. They was like, no. We don't need that centralized control. And so what you saw is that they slowly started getting rid of their dollars and they started buying up way more gold. And so then a few years later, what you saw is that Russia created their kind of own currency with the BRICS nation. What's that simply? That's Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and China. And so what you're seeing is that with these countries, when they're doing business with each other, they're not doing it and settling it in the US dollars. See, if they were settling in the US dollar, that would make the dollar become stronger because there's more demand for it, right? But what you see them actually end up doing is that they're settling it in gold. And so since they're de-dollarizing, getting away from the dollar system, the dollar is getting weaker while gold is getting stronger because they need more demand for gold. Because if they're doing all these transactions in gold, what ends up happening, you need more gold, you need more supply, which brings up the price because it's more in demand. And so you're seeing all these companies, all these countries build up their gold reserve and getting away from dollar. And so the dollar is going to continue to get weaker and weaker. But let's step back. Let's go away from globalization. What does that mean for you? What it means for you is that your checking account, your savings account, right? I assume you have some extra money saved over roughly maybe 3 to 6 months, maybe a year, right? But what I'm saying is that savings account that you have is constantly losing value. So in the next 4 years, maybe you're saving up to buy that down payment for a house. Maybe that down payment for the house is $20,000, $30,000 right now. In a few years, 5 years from now, the dollar could lose more purchasing power and you might need to put $100,000 down for that payment instead of $20,000, $30,000 because the dollar lost purchasing power. So what I would say, this is not a financial advice, is instead of saving all them dollars, saving all your money in dollars, maybe you have 3-6 months for emergency fund, right? That can keep up with inflation, right? If you lose that money through inflation, it's cool because at least you have that liquid. You can sell it. You need it for your family. You need quick money or you have an emergency. You can spend that. But after a certain amount, 6 or 12 months, after you have that comfortable amount, what you do is you start saving your long-term capital in assets that cannot be printed out of thin air. So for example, right, gold cannot be printed out of thin air. So gold goes down, you can buy some more gold. See, the problem with gold is it's a finite asset. If you price things in gold, you'll see that gold maintains its purchasing power over a long period of time. So, but the problem is gold, it might take 10, 20 years to run up. It might only run up during big economic downturn. So another thing you can do is maybe have some money in gold, but I believe Bitcoin is a better form of gold. Why? Because gold still has this one problem, the custodial problem, right? Because it's very hard to, let's say you had $1 million worth of gold and you wanted to leave the US. How are you going to move that gold from the US to, let's say you want to move back to Africa, Brazil, Europe? You're going to have a very hard time, right? And then also another thing is you have to store your gold somewhere. You're usually going to store it in a bank, a vault. And so what ends up happening is that you have one centralized party controlling that gold. Okay? And so if you have one centralized party controlling that gold, you don't own it. If you own it, but it's not in your possession, right? So you have to go to them and make sure they have it. They can lose it. And technically all you have is a paper claim. So what happens if you go there and they don't have that gold no more? See, what happened back in the past is that people would send their gold to the USA, right? And then USA would give them paper claims, which is the dollar. And then one day the US said, hey, we're not backing the dollar anymore by gold. We're keeping your gold and you can just have these dollars. So what happens if that ever happens again to you? Okay? So one of the good things about Bitcoin is that there's no central party controlling it. It's decentralized. The way Bitcoin is mined is through a bunch of different miners, right? And another thing is you can own your Bitcoin and own your keys, right? So you have your private keys that no one can take from you, right? And so that's another good thing about Bitcoin. Or if you want, you can put it on Coinbase or any platform, Strike. I'm not sponsored by them, right? But the thing is, it's going to be very hard to take from you if you own your own keys. Now, there's other benefits of having it on an exchange, which I'm not going to get to in this video. I'm just talking about some of the benefits of Bitcoin. Another thing is Bitcoin traditionally beats inflation, right? So if you look at the price, it might take you 100 Bitcoin to buy a house in 2010. In 2014, and in 2020 it might take you about 10 Bitcoin. Now it might take you 4 or 5 Bitcoin, and in 10 years it might take you only 0.1 of a Bitcoin to buy a house. So Bitcoin usually keeps up with inflation and you maintain your purchasing power and even get more. Because why? There's only a finite amount of Bitcoin you can have. There's only 21 million that will ever be mined, right? But with gold, it's not a finite supply, right? Because you can always mine gold. The problem is it just has to make economic sense for the people mining gold, right? So the gold price is high, they will go mine more gold, and so the supply will always go up. Another thing is real estate. Real estate is a good investment too, right? It might not move as fast as Bitcoin or sometimes even gold, right? Gold will still keep its purchasing power, but real estate, what happens is that you can use it in a financial system. What do I mean by this? When you can use it in a financial system, it's always one, you're gonna get money from equity. That just means you bought a house for $200,000 is worth $500,000 now. So now you have $300,000 more if you sell it, or you can take out loans against it to buy more assets. Then you also get tax write-offs from it, which you can start paying less in taxes and have more income in your pockets to go invest. Also, you can start getting cash flow from having tenants, right? So, and the price of houses, it doesn't get inflated that fast because what happens? You need people to build the house. You need parts, labor, lumber, right? It takes time. It might take you a year depending on how profitable the house is, right? It's affected by interest rate, this buyer and seller market. So a house is a real asset that it's very hard to print. You can't print it just like dollars. So the thing is, what you want to do is you want to work in dollars and save it in assets that can't be printed. Stocks are even good, but stocks can be printed, right? If anyone's worked for big tech, Apple, Google, what ends up happening is that when you start working there, they give you 200 stocks right away, 200 shares, 1,000 shares, and they're basically just printing out those shares, right? But the thing is, you can use those shares will still grow. Sometimes they beat inflation, sometimes they don't, but you can always sell them for more money and then put them to hard asset. Stocks are a way to be able to trade and make some money, okay? And so whatever you do, no matter what, just buy as much assets and stop worrying about actual currency. If you have your 3 to 6 month savings, focus on building your assets as much as possible. That's what rich people do. They collect assets. But if you guys like this kind of content, check out this video right here.